We need to talk about the exact moment criminals stopped fearing the police. I mean, really stopped fearing them and started attacking them directly. This wasn't some spontaneous outburst during mass riots. No, this was a calculated strike deep in the heart of the system. 11 police vehicles at the 116th Precinct, totally disabled, smashed in the dead of night, and it happened specifically during a fragile ideological power transition in New York City. The guardians of public safety are now the targets and their attackers. They walked free just hours later. This wasn't chaos. It was a coordinated public stress test on a collapsing system of justice. But why are law enforcement professionals walking away in record numbers? What happens when the people sworn to protect us surrender? And what does it mean when the justice system actively welcomes back those who attack its authority? We uncover the full story. Stay with us as we break this down in our in-depth discussion right here on News Focus Podcast. And if you find our reporting valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to support our channel. We truly appreciate it. So what we're seeing from the sources we've looked at is it's a picture of a deliberate system failure in New York City. I mean, the breakdown is visible, it's dramatic, and it seems to be accelerating. We have to start with that inciting incident, that attack on the 116th Precinct. It feels like it was both a physical and a symbolic declaration that the rules have changed.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so important to see this for what it is. This isn't just, some random vandalism. This was an act of highly targeted, high visibility defiance. It's aimed straight at the rule of law itself.
Right.
When you attack a police station, you're not just attacking a building. You're attacking the very seat of authority. The brazenness this mob showed, doing this in the middle of the night, has fundamentally shaken veteran officers and, the communities they serve. This was a message. And it was sent with sledgehammers and shattered glass.
Let's get closer into the sheer destructive efficiency of it.
Yeah.
We're talking about a mob that descended on an NYPD station with one very clear goal: pure operational disablement. The details show they systematically went after 11 police vehicles. They weren't just keying them or spray painting.
This was methodical.
They smashed windshields, ripped mirrors off. They went for essential electronics.
And that level of destruction, it just points to planning.
Yeah.
The intent wasn't just to deface public property for a photo op.
Yeah.
The intent was to take those essential tools of public safety offline. I mean, just imagine it. A dozen patrol cars, the very things a precinct relies on to respond to calls, rendered completely crippled, useless, just waiting for tow trucks at dawn. This isn't superficial damage. It's a direct blow to the ability of officers to respond to the next 911 call, the next violent crime, the next domestic disturbance.
A direct hit on their readiness.
Exactly. A direct hit on operational readiness in that entire neighborhood.
What's really disturbing to me, though, is the psychological element you mentioned. The absolute lack of fear. We're used to seeing criminals, operate in the dark or flee the scene.
Of course.
But the sources state this mob showed no fear. They didn't run, they didn't hide. One observer said they acted like there was zero chance of consequences.
And that right there, that's a huge psychological shift. It's like a line has been crossed. It's the absolute collapse of deterrence theory, but we're seeing it in practice. If a mob can attack the very symbols of law enforcement and do it with impunity, that understanding spreads like wildfire through the criminal element. It completely changes the cost-benefit analysis of committing a crime. If the cost is zero, well, why hold back?
And the timing makes this so much more potent. This wasn't in the heat of some nationwide protest months ago. This happened during a uniquely fragile period, right before the new administration, led by Zoran Mamdani, is set to take over. And this incoming leadership is, it's widely seen by law enforcement as shifting priorities.
Yeah.
Moving away from law and order and more toward what the source is calling experimentation with ideology.
You've raised a really profound point there about the timing. That strike basically confirmed what many officers were already whispering, that the entire environment is shifting. Criminal elements, whether they're organized or just opportunistic, they can often smell weakness or political vulnerability.
They see an opening.
They saw a highly visible political transition, one that was using rhetoric that was hostile to traditional policing, and they decided to test the boundary. By attacking the precinct right then, they were probing the resolve of the incoming regime. It was a signal that lawlessness is ready to explode the second the political structure weakens. It set the tone for the new administration before they even walked in the door.
And the outcome of the arrests that were eventually made, it just validated that total lack of fear. So we have a suspect. He's charged with 14 counts of criminal mischief, account for nearly every single vehicle destroyed.
14.
resisting arrest, and 2 weapons charges. I mean, these are serious offenses.
Very serious.
You're targeting state property, public safety assets, and yet this person was released hours later.
And this is the moment where the betrayal of the justice system becomes so clear. We have to dive into the legal mechanics here. The critical reason he was released, according to reports, is that the crimes were not bail eligible under current state law.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because for the average person listening, the idea that you can destroy almost a dozen police cars and be back on the street by morning feels, well, the word used was insane.
It does.
How can 13 counts of criminal mischief, on police cars no less, fall outside the category of crimes that require bail?
It's a complex but really crucial point, and it's rooted in the state's extensive bail reform laws. Before the reforms, a judge had a lot more discretion to set bail based on, the severity of the crime, if the defendant was a flight risk, that sort of thing. The new laws drastically, and I mean drastically, reduced the list of eligible offenses. So for crimes involving property damage or even some assaults, the question became, is this legally a violent felony or is it a non-violent property crime?
So even though the damage was aimed at police infrastructure, destroying those 11 cars, which has to be millions of dollars in loss and disruption, it's legally treated the same as, spray painting a subway wall?
In the context of mandatory bail eligibility, essentially, yes. Criminal mischief, no matter the scale or the target, even if it's critical infrastructure like police cruisers, is often classified as a non-violent offense. So unless that suspect was also charged with a clearly defined violent felony, like aggravated assault on an officer, the judge's hands were pretty much tied.
Wow.
The law mandates release pending trial for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. The system basically signaled that the massive, coordinated destruction of public safety assets is not a sufficient threat to public safety to hold someone even overnight.
Which means the system is giving permission, as you said earlier.
That is the direct interpretation. I mean, when the system fails to apply any meaningful penalty, not even temporary detention, the whole function of deterrence just evaporates. The message sent to that mob is crystal clear. This level of destruction against the police themselves carries no immediate cost. You can directly challenge the authority of the state and sleep in your own bed hours later.
And what's the compounding effect of that, especially on the officers who are the targets of the attack?
For the officers, it feels like a profound betrayal.
I can imagine.
They risk their safety to respond, to secure the scene, make an arrest. They spend hours on paperwork and getting ready for court, only to see the suspect back on the street immediately. It completely undermines their purpose. It tells them that the danger they faced, the destruction of their tools, it's not a priority for the very judicial system they serve, and that psychological injury is arguably more damaging than the smashed windshields. It is the core reason deterrence isn't just weakening, it's collapsing.
And that lack of institutional support isn't just demoralizing. It's actually measurable in the personnel stats, which is our next crucial point. Because this sense of betrayal is feeding a mass exodus from the department. The numbers we're seeing that detail this internal crisis of the NYPD they're truly devastating. This is way past routine turnover. We are witnessing an internal bleed that threatens to leave the city fundamentally unpoliced in critical areas.
The statistics are a screaming alarm bell. Our sources are indicating that since just last October, 3,668 officers have walked away.
3,600.
That's an average of 10 police officers quitting every single day. That is a massive systemic drain on institutional knowledge, on training investment, and on the manpower on the street that the city just can't recover quickly.
And the result of this unprecedented exodus, is that the department's headcount has just plummeted to 33,745.
Right.
For the most veteran officers, this is the lowest they've ever seen it in their careers. It means the gap between what the city needs and what it actually has is getting wider fast.
That deficiency gap is the heart of the public safety crisis. Conventional standards based on population and workload, they say a city the size and complexity of New York needs at least 42,000 officers.
42,000.
At least. To maintain adequate service, effective community outreach, robust emergency response, they are currently running nearly 8,000 officers short of that functional standard. They're operating on fumes. And the officers who are left are feeling that strain in a very real, acute way.
So if you've lost almost 3,700 officers in a year, the workload of all those people, it doesn't just vanish.
Not at all.
It lands squarely on the remaining force, which leads to mandatory overtime, more hostility on the streets, and just a total collapse in morale.
The mandatory overtime is a slow-motion disaster. It doesn't just create physical exhaustion. It creates this profound psychological fatigue that strips officers of their resilience.
Mm.
They lose critical time with their families, which leads to stress at home. When you're constantly operating in a high-stress, high-danger environment without enough rest or emotional recovery time, you become less effective. You're more prone to making mistakes. You get fundamentally more cynical about the mission.
And I imagine specialized units are hit the hardest.
They are. Units involved in detective work or community affairs are often the first to suffer because their officers are constantly being pulled away for essential but draining patrol duties.
It sounds like a spiral. The fewer officers you have, the more strained the remaining ones become, which leads to more people quitting, creating an even greater strain, and it just goes on and on.
It's a self-perpetuating negative feedback loop. The city is essentially trying to run a marathon with half its runners tied together. And remember, every single officer who quits takes, 10 to 15 years of irreplaceable street-level knowledge with them?
You can't just replace that.
You can't replace that with a new recruit fresh out of the academy, even if recruitment was keeping pace with people leaving, which it isn't.
This shift in the internal climate is fascinating. Our sources are suggesting that officers aren't just describing their state as burnout anymore, which implies, physical exhaustion.
Right.
They're calling it surrender. What's the distinction there? Why the change in language?
The distinction is absolutely crucial. Burnout is what happens when you work too hard for too long. Surrender is the consequence of realizing that the political leadership you serve has made your job fundamentally impossible or hostile. The source of the pressure has shifted from the streets to City Hall.
And the rhetoric of the incoming Mamdani administration is being cited directly by veteran NYPD officers as the primary reason for this mass exodus.
Precisely. The officers are reading the political tea leaves, and the agenda isn't subtle. Mamdani has openly talked about freezing or diverting NYPD funding, eliminating units they consider politically undesirable, and shifting thousands of critical 911 calls away from trained police to unarmed civilians. To a veteran officer, that's not reform. That's a declaration of systemic hostility.
So when officers who spent decades dealing with the city's most volatile situations hear talk of eliminating their support structures, restricting their authority, how does that land on the ground?
It's interpreted as abandonment. They fear that under Mamdani, they'll be intentionally placed in volatile situations, like responding to an armed disturbance or controlling a violent crowd without the necessary legal authority, training, or backup to survive or to effectively control the situation.
You believe policing will become?
Utterly impossible. Not just dangerous, which it always has been, but impossible. They see the stripping away of their operational tools as a political decision that prioritizes ideology over their safety and the public safety.
But to be fair, shouldn't some of these reforms, like redirecting certain mental health calls, be seen as a necessary move? Is the concern strictly about the method and the scope?
That's an important point to bring up for balance. The concern is primarily about the scope, the speed, and the timing of these changes. Yes, a specialized, unarmed response for some mental health calls might be beneficial in principle.
Right.
But the proposed system applies this shift to thousands of 911 calls, many of which officers know from experience involve potential violence or escalating danger. They are leaving because they view these proposals not as nuanced reform, but as the reckless removal of their protective shield against mass chaos. The sentiment is summarized very clearly. The smart ones are getting out.
That sentiment that the smart officers are leaving now, that suggests a strategic calculation. What's the prediction they're making?
It's a risk assessment. It's based on their job security and their personal safety. They were predicting that the new political regime will make their profession legally and practically untenable. They anticipate being caught in an impossible bind, expected to maintain order, but having their essential enforcement tools taken away.
Which would lead to more internal investigations, public condemnation.
Exactly. And potential civil or criminal liability. They are getting out before the collapse fully materializes. They're securing their pensions and moving to jurisdictions where they feel their work is actually respected and supported.
Which leads us directly to the proposed policy overhaul itself. This isn't just theory, is it? The incoming administration is moving with what seems less alarming speed to dismantle key operational units and replace them with unproven, civilian-led alternatives. And the first, maybe the most controversial target, is the city's main riot control unit.
The proposed dismantling of the Strategic Response Group, the SRG, is an immediate flashpoint.
Yes.
It signifies a profound shift in how the city plans to manage civil unrest and coordinated violence.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar with this kind of unit, what exactly is the SRG? How is it different from a standard patrol unit?
Well, the SRG is the NYPD's highly specialized dual-purpose unit. They focus on anti-riot control and anti-terror deployment. Unlike your precinct officers, who are focused on localized crime, SRG officers get extensive training in crowd management, de-escalation for large groups, and they have specialized equipment for mass deployment.
So they're mobile.
Highly mobile. They are designed to rapidly respond to large-scale threats that would overwhelm local resources. They are, in effect, the city's ready reserve force for when localized violence spirals into mass disorder.
So when do they typically get deployed? Can you give us some context on their core function?
Their functions are pretty broad. It covers everything from an immediate response to a terrorist threat to managing political demonstrations that turn violent, or, for instance, when a mob like the one that attacked the 116th Precinct forms outside a police station.
They're the ones you call in.
They are the shock troops you need to prevent chaos from spreading. Historically, they've been critical during large political conventions or when ICE agents face coordinated attacks. They manage the largest protests where crowd control is necessary to protect infrastructure and bystanders.
And the political stance from the Mamdani administration is that this unit has to go because it threatens First Amendment rights. The claim is it's used to suppress free speech.
That is the rhetorical and political justification being used to eliminate it. They frame the SRG as an instrument of oppression, not defense. But critics within law enforcement are sounding the alarm. They're warning that this is a catastrophic misreading of the unit's operational necessity. Removing the SRG doesn't protect free speech. It removes the city's last line of defense against genuinely violent, organized opposition.
So if the SRG is gone, what's the practical reality for a precinct officer when a mob of, say, 50 or 100 people suddenly shows up and starts damaging police property or, even worse, attacking citizens during a protest?
The operational gap is terrifying. Standard precinct officers are trained for individual or maybe small group confrontations.
Right.
They lack the collective training, the specialized gear, and the sheer numbers necessary to disperse a large, organized, and violent mob safely. Without the SRG, the city becomes completely exposed during the next flash mob, the next political demonstration, or even coordinated attack. There will be no readily available disciplined force capable of rapid intervention to restore order. The city's resilience against that rapid escalation, that ability to shut down disorder before it goes viral, is eliminated overnight.
And at the same time, they're removing the city's ability to handle mass violence. The new administration is proposing this billion-dollar experiment, a new Department of Community Safety to handle thousands of calls that historically went to the NYPD.
This is the core proposal, yes. To replace core NYPD responsibilities by dispatching unarmed social workers and mental health teams instead of armed police for a large percentage of 911 calls, particularly for calls related to mental health crises or non-violent disturbances. The theory is that a non-law enforcement response is more effective for behavioral issues.
And in theory, addressing mental health with professionals sounds appropriate. But we have hard data on a similar pilot program from 2021 that, according to the sources, failed miserably.
Yeah.
We need to understand why it failed.
The failure was rooted in the fundamental unpredictability of these crisis situations. The key statistic is alarming. 60% of the calls handled during that pilot were ultimately deemed ineligible for a civilian-only response.
60%.
60, because the situations were just too dangerous. What that means is that in 6 out of 10 calls, the unarmed teams would have been walking into a potentially life-threatening situation without the necessary protection or training to stabilize the scene.
What specifically makes a situation too dangerous for civilians? Is it just about known weapons, or is it potential violence?
It's both. Crisis intervention training for police covers recognizing verbal cues, assessing threat levels, deploying non-lethal force if they have to, all while staying aware of potential weapons. Unarmed social workers, while they're experts in counseling, they lack the legal authority to detain someone. The tactical training for self-defense against a physical attack, or even the implied threat of control that an officer's presence provides.
Right.
Too dangerous meant either a weapon was present, the person was actively lunging or threatening violence, or the whole scene was just too unstable and chaotic. And given that crisis levels in the city are escalating, the danger in these calls has only gone up since 2021.
Let's use that specific anecdote from the sources, the one about the subway incident. A disturbed individual shouting, lunging at terrified commuters. This is the definition of a volatile crisis. What happens in that scenario under the new model?
That scenario is the perfect stress test. The new model would mandate sending unarmed community safety teams. So imagine that team entering a subway car where a person is actively creating fear and escalating the situation. The unarmed social worker, even with de-escalation training, has zero defense against someone who chooses to get violent or who suddenly pulls out a weapon.
Whereas a seasoned officer relies on their training, their backup, and the authority to establish a boundary, which can often prevent it from escalating to physical violence just by their presence.
Precisely. The outcome is pretty clear. The city isn't just unprepared for this experiment, it's dangerously vulnerable. The whole system relies on this highly optimistic assumption that disturbed individuals will always respond rationally to verbal de-escalation, even when they're in psychosis or on drugs. If that subway incident is the standard test case, the civilian teams will be overwhelmed. They'll put themselves and the public at grave risk, forcing an emergency and probably delayed police response anyway.
Which defeats the whole purpose.
It defeats the purpose, and it compounds the danger. Criminals and disturbed individuals will recognize that vulnerability immediately, and they will exploit it. And what's really fueling the anxiety inside the NYPD is not just the content of these radical policies, but the expected speed of implementation.
You mean the political brakes that usually slow down systemic changes are just gone?
Completely gone. We're talking about an incoming administration with a city council that is ideologically and strategically aligned. The sources describe this as a unified socialist bloc, which signals they are ready to rubber stamp his agenda at warp speed.
So no checks and balances.
Virtually none left to encourage reflection or, slow, measured implementation.
So this isn't about gradual, phased reform over 3 to 5 years. This could happen in the first 90 days of the new term.
That is the core fear within the department. Commanders are worried about losing critical tools and entire specialized units overnight. This rapid, immediate implementation creates a nightmare scenario for maintaining institutional continuity and training. I mean, how do you retrain thousands of officers when the legislative structure is changing faster than the bureaucracy can possibly adapt?
The political reality seems to be that since resistance inside City Hall is gone, the administration doesn't need to negotiate or compromise, they just execute.
They're operating with a clear mandate and a clear runway, and this acceleration makes the officer exodus a race against time. Officers are trying to secure their futures and their safety before the inevitable happens, before their departments are gutted, their authority is stripped, and their ability to respond to escalating chaos is completely curtailed by politics. The speed of the change is proving to be as destructive as the change itself.
So we've documented the internal collapse, the exodus, and this coming ideological replacement of core police functions. Now we have to connect these things to the tangible public safety reality for everyday New Yorkers, and to the high-stakes political showdown that's brewing externally.
The loss of nearly 3,700 officers since last October, combined with the mandatory overtime stretching the remaining force thin, it's not a theoretical problem. It's having a direct, measurable, and highly dangerous impact on emergency services right now.
What are the primary indicators of this breakdown that people are feeling in real time?
The most immediate metric is the increase in 9/11 response times. They're climbing across the board. That 8,000 officer deficiency gap means patrol sectors are chronically understaffed. Burglaries, assaults, disturbances that used to get a fast response, which is critical for stabilizing a situation, are now just sitting in queue.
There are no available units.
Dispatchers are often left with no available units in large areas of the city.
And when that response time goes up, the window for intervention just shrinks dramatically.
Exactly. Every minute a victim waits for help is a minute where a dangerous situation can escalate, where evidence can be compromised, or where the perpetrators can get away. The police's core function rapid response to mitigate ongoing danger is eroding rapidly. And this failure to respond quickly is compounded by the proposed policy solution.
We have to reiterate that dilemma because it's the central paradox of this strategy. The less capacity the police have, the more the new administration wants to rely on unarmed civilian alternatives.
The logic is completely inverted. If trained, armed officers, even operating under maximum strain, can't respond fast enough to volatile situations, what logical chance do these unarmed civilian teams have when they arrive? They'll be responding to calls the police couldn't get to because they were short-staffed, which means the situation has already had time to escalate dangerously. The system isn't just straining, it's breaking in real time. It's creating a vacuum that both chronic and opportunistic criminals are rushing to fill.
And this breakdown forces us to look outward, because as the city prepares to systematically dismantle its own police function, it's simultaneously entering a direct political and legal confrontation with the federal government.
That confrontation creates a very volatile scenario. As the city struggles with internal safety, it's doubling down on its sanctuary city policies, setting the stage for a massive legal and operational showdown with President Trump's second administration, which has prioritized a law and order platform and strict federal enforcement.
Federal officials, specifically ICE, have been clear about the public safety implications of the city's current stance, especially concerning criminal illegal immigrants. What ICE's stated needs?
ICE's primary demand, according to the sources, is simple. They want access to Rikers Island.
Okay.
They want cooperation to detain criminal illegal immigrants safely inside the jail. This is all about minimizing risk. Processing individuals inside a secure jail, where security is maximized and resistance is controlled, protects the agents, the suspects, and the public.
But the New York City Council has actively blocked that access. They're refusing to cooperate with federal detainer requests, which essentially creates an unnecessary obstacle for federal law enforcement.
This blockage is the critical point of conflict. By refusing to allow safe, controlled detention inside a secure facility, the city forces ICE to conduct dangerous street arrests.
Right.
This means federal agents have to find and apprehend individuals, often with serious criminal histories, in public spaces on busy streets, in apartment buildings near schools. It dramatically escalates the risk of confrontation, injury, or collateral damage to bystanders, agents, and the suspects themselves.
The federal officials are issuing some very clear high-stakes warnings that connect the city's political stance directly to public danger.
They are explicitly warning that NYC's sanctuary stance is actively creating public safety threats. The political decision to defy federal law enforcement is, in their view, prioritizing ideology over public safety. They argue that if the city just cooperated and allowed safe transfers, the need for high-risk public street arrests would vanish. The non-cooperation is turning routine administrative transfers into volatile public safety threats.
And the incoming city administration, led by Mamdani, shows absolutely no sign of bending to federal offers of collaboration. They seem to be doubling down on defiance as they come into office.
That political defiance is foundational to the incoming administration's identity. They see this resistance as a defense of their ideological principles, a defense of their constituents. But this hardline stance immediately pits them against the anticipated priorities of the federal government, which operates under a completely different mandate.
Let's look at the countersignal coming from the White House. The Trump administration's platform is explicit: law and order and no retreat on border enforcement.
The federal signal is the polar opposite of surrender. While the White House has offered collaboration, they've made it clear that if sanctuary policies continue to actively block federal law enforcement, they will respond with an increased federal presence and enforcement.
They'll escalate.
They'll escalate. The administration will likely invoke specific legal statutes or court rulings to challenge NYC's ability to impede federal officers. This could escalate through the courts or through direct, massive resource deployment. The White House has stated plainly that New York City's refusal to cooperate puts public safety at extreme risk, creating a scenario where they might feel compelled to intervene more aggressively.
So we have two completely unbending, ideologically driven positions heading for an inevitable, dramatic collision in the heart of the most populous city in the nation.
This sets the stage for a direct confrontation: federal enforcement versus socialist city governance. The city administration is prioritizing ideological defiance, while the federal government is signaling an uncompromising approach to law enforcement. It creates a deeply volatile two-front crisis for New Yorkers. You've got an internal safety collapse driven by the police exodus and the policy overhaul, and an external political battle that risks turning city streets into enforcement battlegrounds. That attack on the 116th precinct wasn't the end of the story. It was just the opening salvo in a city testing the limits of its own collapsing authority, just before the deepest reduction in police power in modern history takes hold. The stage is set for a full-scale systemic crisis. If we synthesize all the factors we've discussed, the symbolic and physical assault on police facilities, the loss of thousands of experienced officers, a judicial system that has lost its power of deterrence due to fundamental legislative change, and a radical, rapid policy overhaul, it paints a picture of a major American city intentionally dismantling its own safety infrastructure. New Yorkers are increasingly living in fear, and the fear is precisely what happens when the police cannot or will not intervene because their authority has been removed and their capacity depleted. The tragic conclusion drawn from our sources is that criminal criminals are getting braver because they rightly believe the city is actively becoming unprotected, and the worst consequences of this ideological experiment are still to come.
That brings this deep dive to a close. That's all for this deep dive. But it leaves us with one haunting question. If the guardians of the rules are the first to break them, who is left to protect the game?